when I choose that I love you, period,
Yeah.
then when things go awry, when I'm stressed, when you're not doing things that I appreciate, I still have to choose to see.
Get your daily dose of motivation on the Motivational Moments with Michelle podcast. In Motivation with Michelle podcast, you'll get encouraging, uplifting, and life-changing wisdom that will transform your world at your fingertips, 24 hours a day. Get a fuller, deeper revelation of the tools you can implement to see incredible transformation in your life from Michelle Neustadter's powerful teachings. Tune in whenever you need to be edified, uplifted, or a dose of motivation, no matter where you are. Subscribe to Motivational Moments with Michelle podcast with Michelle Neustadter today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud.
When you think about the turning point for you and Melissa, what was it?
It was 3 years in when I almost walked out on her. And we had a 4.5 month separation inside the house because we were young and broke. So we decided to save money and I moved to the basement. And I remember my wife made a very critical decision that I know saved our marriage. She decided to love the unlovable, which was me. I was very selfish. I had a whole pros and cons list as to why I should leave. And it was very, very self-centered. And my pastor at the time, I remember him pulling me aside and coaching me through this difficult point, telling me that love is a decision, not a feeling, and that I was supposed to lead. And I never had a vision of fighting for my marriage. I never had a vision for having to do something. I thought it was supposed to come to me. I thought it was supposed to be easy. And that was the first time that I really got challenged to man up in a way, but it was done through love. And that's what kind of turned my perspective from what can this marriage do for me to how can I serve my wife? And over those 4.5 months, we started to develop some patience. We started dating again. We kept sex off the table because I know it would have confused things. So over those 4.5 months, she would cry herself to sleep in prayer, holding me up before God. I didn't know any of this until afterwards. And then by the end of that 4.5 months, we found ourselves renewing our vows with a small ceremony with our pastor and our previous best man and maid of honor. We relit our unity candle that we first lit 3 years ago in our service. And we decided to make that covenant to do this again and do it differently than we had before. So that was our defining moment. We decided to say, how do we serve one another? We started making it about the other person instead of ourselves.
When you say that those initial decisions were led by like selfish nature, what did those look like? I know you said you guys were young. And I mean, I think a lot of people that are actually seeking support in relationships right now are young. I think they're trying to be more proactive than reactive. But once they notice that there's any challenge, they're immediately seeking support. So in terms of those like younger selfish mindsets, what do those look like?
My mindset was it was rooted in addiction is the best way that I can describe it. My wife and I did some things that I would say is out of the norm for relationships nowadays. We had both saved our virginity till marriage. So one of the prevailing thoughts that was going through my mind was, and this is really embarrassing to say, but I wanted to have sex with somebody other than my wife. So I've never been with any other woman. That was going through my mind. It was lust. It was my addiction to pornography that was never challenged back then. And that was still alive and well in my life. And it would continue in my life for many years until I finally got a hold of that about 6 or 7 years ago. But this was a mindset of mine. It was all about what's in this for me. And I started on my pros list. It was all very sexualized. I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to be away from that. I want my time back. I don't want to have to feel like I'm giving up my social life anymore. All these things that I was working through. And then the cons, I only had two things that I was afraid of. I didn't want to pay alimony, and I didn't want to lose the relationship with my kids. So those were the two things that were keeping me in the marriage, which was just fear-based. And then everything else was my own vanity and lust that wanted me to get out of it.
I mean, you said that there's a difference in like couples today. Do you think that they're walking in with different selfish mindsets?
I believe it. I mean, I really do believe that there's an even bigger agenda going on to attack relationships. I've never quite seen anything like this, but it's funny that we're talking about relationships, because even this Sunday, I remember hearing some things that really got me thinking. But when we think about marriage coming under attack, wherever we're at in this journey, I've noticed that there are a couple key things that are taking out relationships. And the agenda, the overall agenda, seems to be destruction. Relationships are dangerous. I look at the way that we're seeing marriages redefined. I'm looking at how people are going through the dating thing, and there's a ton of hurt. And you as a marriage expert, and me as a therapist working with a lot of marriage stuff as well, I know we've seen these patterns of hurting people that continue to hurt people. Marriages, relationships, dating relationships, they've come under attack in ways that we've never seen. And the agenda seems to be destruction. And what I've also noticed is under that agenda, there seems to be a strategy. And the strategy that I'm noticing at play is division. If we can keep people divided for whatever reason, it makes it easier to destroy that relationship unit. And then if we keep going deeper, we have an agenda, we have a strategy, and then we have a tactic. What is the tactic that's employed most frequently to divide, separate, and ultimately destroy relationships? I believe is offense. I've never seen a people group than I have now that is so easily offended. We do not know how to tolerate the opinions of other people. Everything has to be based on what I see and what I want. And it's that easy offended mind that brings us into conflict so quickly, that further divides us, and then that further leads to the destruction of relationships. So that's what I've been noticing in terms of an overall theme that I'm noticing in relationships. Is people come in, we may not know about this agenda, but I wonder how many of us subscribe to this idea that it's supposed to be, maybe it's by expectations, and we've talked about this before, but maybe it's the way things should be. And we live with a bunch of these shoulds, and we should on our partner, and we should on ourselves. And we have this chronic mindset of how you're supposed to serve me.
So then when those elements are not in there, that's when people find themselves in offense, because they are focusing so much more on me and my needs, and how either this relationship or my partner is not serving me at this particular moment in time. And that whole, you said one of the mindsets that you had was that it should be easy.
Yeah.
And at times it's not easy, and it takes a lot of work, and a lot of work on my part to show up as the spouse that I need to be, and not just expect my partner to show up the way I want them to.
Exactly.
That's those shoulds again, right?
Yep.
And
that's the 50-50 that we see. Like, how many couples, if they're being honest, subscribe to a 50-50 mindset? I do my 50, you better do yours. But if you do 35, I'm suddenly very aware of what you're not doing. What does the 35 represent? Expectations on the other person. We're shoulding on them. You should be doing your 50. It doesn't work. That's why the only real number that works, which is really goofy, is that 100, 0. I love you, period. It doesn't matter what you're doing or not doing back to me. Hopefully that doesn't continue that way, because we don't want to create a chronic give and take situation where I'm the perpetual giver and my partner's the chronic taker. that would demonstrate and illustrate that we've got a lot more going on in that relationship that probably tends towards abuse, if anything, because in a healthy relationship, if one person's being loved 100% with no expectations, the odds of that person just being a chronic taker, I would think, are very, very small. You would know as well, like, do you see people that learn how to serve one another? And does that not perpetuate this ongoing pattern of service? I've loved you. Now my partner is actually trying to be creative and they want to learn how to love me. And that becomes a very fun kind of competition, because now we're trying to outdo one another in love instead of trying to find ways to divide.
Yeah, because the quid pro quo mindset always divides.
Right.
I do for you if you do for me.
Right.
And then nobody does anything.
Right. Which is why real love simply does. My wife and I just finished an audiobook from a lawyer named Bob Goff, and it was called Love Does. And I've never heard of anything so radical as this guy. It wasn't all about marriage. It was about kids. It was about neighbors. It was about Uganda and loving people. It just blew my mind how radical this guy is. But he quite simply, that was the title of his book. That's the title of his international organization that is freeing witch doctors from child sacrifice and like crazy, crazy stuff, all because he decided to love the unlovable, and love does. He will fly halfway around the world just because love does. Now he's got the resources to support that, but he's using them wisely. And I've never seen a guy quite embrace this crazy notion that love is a verb like he does. It's not just an idea. I don't love you if you love me. It's I love you, period. And if we could have that rattle our minds, how committed are we to this idea of love? Is it what you were saying, quid pro quo? Is it I'll love you if, I'll love you when, or I'll love you until? That would be conditional love. If we could take those conditions off, we would suddenly be faced with the highest form of love, which in the Greek is called agape love. And it's this unconditional positive regard that says, I love you, period. Or love does. And we add no other definition after that. It's just simply love does. Is this simple for those of you listening? Yes, it's simple. Is it easy? No way. This is not easy stuff. It's simple, but it's not easy. Some of the best things in life are simple, but they're not easy. So this is where I'd like us to maybe redefine expectations around relationships. But when we think of the agenda to destroy and divide and create offense between people versus the simplicity of just loving, period, without expectations on the other person, where could this take us today? Where could this lead relationships for those that are listening? And how do we change the way that we think around relationships? What are your thoughts, Michelle?
Well, that's exactly it, though, right? We have to change our mindset around it, because we have to choose to see.
Yeah.
When I choose that I love you, period,
yeah,
then when things go awry, when I'm stressed, when you're not doing things that I appreciate, I still have to choose to see.
That's it.
Which means I have to step myself out of that cycle I get moving in my mind by, I'm putting up my protest sign and I'm gonna be stubborn and keep you out, and that type of thing where I'm just gonna justify my frustration and my anger, instead shifting where I choose to see. I choose to see all the ways that you actually add value. I choose to see and remember day in and day out why I chose you. It can be hard sometimes though, because we get these like lenses on. It's like we're wearing those, they talk about rose-colored glasses, but we can wear lots of other different shades, and we can see our world straight through that lens rather than see it for really what it is.
Yeah.
And we can forget what it felt like. We can forget what drew us to that person. We can forget why we, sucked it up this far, or pushed through this far, or like really wanted to like do the work up to this point. Do we forget what we vowed when we got married? We forget the little nuances about that person that in the beginning we were like, oh my goodness, I absolutely adore this thing about this person. And now I'm just thinking about how much they frustrate me and annoy me. So then I'm not showing up anymore, and I'm not communicating effectively anymore because I'm putting up walls and I'm shutting down and I'm wearing these lenses. So if I can't start to make a shift in that mindset, I'm never going to find myself back in that space. I need somebody to be able to like push me or challenge me to see that again, to take off those glasses.
Yeah, and maybe instead of them being rose colored, they're a very different color. Like we're looking at things through a very smeared, dark lens because all we see is their faults. And I know we've talked about this before, but when I look at relationships and I work with people, I'm always challenging them that every human being, myself included, we have 10 strengths and we have 10 faults. So if we hyperfixate on our 10 faults, it will overshadow all the things, like you're saying, that we fell in love with. We have a hard time seeing what first attracted us when all we're doing is nitpicking our partner apart. Well, you do this and you leave this and you did this and you never do this and I never. And it's like, okay, I'm not saying those things don't exist, but every strength can often be twisted. And I know I've studied some of this even when looking at like dialectic behavior therapy, but take a look at leaders today. Take a look at one real strong leader. And I'm not going to name names, but let's just say there's a leader who's prone to narcissism or bravado and a lot of look at me kind of thing. That's a very negative trait. But on the other side of that, if people would look, what they see is charisma. They see vision. So what in an unhealthy leader could be all about me and narcissistic, whatever, when under restraint, turns into this kind of charisma that inspires people to follow. It's the same quality. So how do we get these people to see the good when the reality of the bad is staring us right in the face? Are they defined by these bad things, or can we use this lens that looks deeper and we start to see that there is more than just the sum total of their mistakes, but there is actually strengths hidden in plain sight?
Yeah. But if we hyper focus on all those negatives, our languaging really does have a huge impact on our perception and our experience of a moment, right? So if I hyper focus on all the negative things and all the weaknesses, and or even the negative side of the strengths, right? That's how I'm going to experience, feel, and perceive that other person.
Do you want to reignite the spark in your relationship?
How can you be more fearless?
How can you anchor yourself to the truths you know, but you aren't living out?
Fearlessly Anchored Marriages is a program that will teach you to live love intentionally. Anything you want in life does not come accidentally.
So why would your relationship be any different?
Over the next 12 weeks, you will be exposed to some of the mindset blocks that could interfere with your current relationship. You will be coached to learn how to set boundaries, how to recognize opportunities, how to develop self-awareness, how to lead yourself and lead your relationship.
We've all been there. The struggle is real. We want to feel connected, heard, valued, and loved. Join us in transforming your relationship. Reignite the flame.
Reconnect. Refresh.
Fearlessly
Anchored Marriages. Let's live love
intentionally.